Motherfucking Mortal Kombat. You don't get much more badass than that. When this sumbitch came out, it changed the landscape of gaming entirely. It garnered praise and a ton of controversy. Even the government was trying to ban it until they came up with the bright idea of ratings. It's crazy to think with how violent the series is today, this caused an uproar. Nowadays, the gore isn't too crazy, but back in '92, holy shit. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen before. While Street Fighter II was revolutionary for fighting games, Mortal Kombat was revolutionary for video games as a whole. The game was turned into a comic book, cartoon, movie, live-action series, trading cards, and of course the album by the Immortals with that legendary single, Techno Syndrome, which became the Mortal Kombat theme. But the whole album just pummels you with a meteor shower of sizzling hot beats! One of the biggest things about this game was the special moves and the fatalities, which all required complex button combinations, which we had to commit to memory. You know how much of our brain power that used up? We were sitting in school and supposed to be listening to our history lesson, but instead we're tuning out the teacher and just thinking forward high kick, down up low punch. You know, we're all hopped up on GamePro magazines. We can't wait to get to the arcade. So once the bell rings and school lets out, that's the time to let it rip, to let it fucking loose, running the bus screaming, Mortal Kombat! Yeah, just like the kid in the commercial. I mean, he goes out in the streets and screams Mortal Kombat as if his life depends on it, with raw emotions tearing through like a shockwave, paving a radius of mighty force emanating from the ground where he stands. And then a crowd marches out, as if they heard the call to action, as if to say, damn straight, Mortal Kombat. Because this isn't just a game, this is a way of fucking life. The commercial, of course, was announcing that Mortal Kombat was coming to home consoles. The year of our Lord, September 13th, 1993. Mortal fucking Monday. This would be the day a crowd of edgy 90s teens gathered in the streets to celebrate. Because when it was in the arcades, it was always surrounded and guarded by bigger kids, the quarter hogs. But now, we'd be taking it back to our own homes. That commercial announcing Mortal Monday was like a call of freedom, a call that begged to be reckoned with, a call that defined the generation. Mortal Kombat! While the definitive way to play Mortal Kombat will always be the arcade, people couldn't wait to bring the game home and start ripping out hearts and spines from their couches. Each port is more or less a fair recreation of the arcade version, however they all have minor and sometimes major differences that keep the game from being 100% there. We still ate it up though. Mortal Kombat's launch went down as one of the biggest game releases in history, and we all crowded around our living rooms to witness it in all its violent glory. So, how'd all these ports stack up against each other? Like this. First, let's look at the Super Nintendo version. This port was published by Acclaim and developed by Sculptured Software. After turning it on, you get this little animation of Goro walking up and punching the Acclaim logo. Yeah, and of course, Acclaim is the company that bought LJN. Yeah, punch that logo, Goro. Yeah. Punch the fuck out of it! Yeah, I could watch him punch that fucking logo all day! So, right off the bat, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. The thing that everybody talks about is that the Super Nintendo version was censored and is infamous for removing the blood or replacing it with sweat. The sweat thing? If that's really supposed to be sweat, you know what? That's kind of disgusting. I think it's even more disgusting than blood. I mean, how sweaty are these fighters to begin with? They only just started fighting and like a gallon of sweat came out of Scorpion. I hope they're slamming down Gatorade in between matches, otherwise they're going to have some serious dehydration issues. In my opinion, the first Mortal Kombat was never known to be a tight and precise fighting game. It was more of a mindless blood sport that you and your friends played for fun. And it was just the style of it, how it was basically like Enter the Dragon, the game. But removing the blood, it just makes this a mediocre fighter on the Super Nintendo, with Street Fighter II Turbo out the same year. But sadly, compared to all the other issues this game has, the lack of blood is only minor. But before we get into this shit, let's talk about what this game does well. For one, the game looks pretty damn close to the arcade. The graphics are clean, the sound is decent, and the voice samples sound pretty clear. Right. But all that is shit on by some of the most frustrating controls I've ever felt. The game just feels unresponsive. There's been so many times where I'm hitting buttons and nothing happens. Sometimes I'll be nowhere near the enemy, but able to sweep them infinitely from a mile away. So another thing that blows is getting hit while shooting a projectile cancels your projectile. In the arcade version, if I shoot ice but get hit by the opponent's projectile, my ice still hits them, but in the Super Nintendo version, it disappears. I don't know why they would program it like this. All this really comes to a head when you hit the endurance levels. Oh my lord, the endurance levels. I spent more time on these 3 levels than I did on the rest of the game. Having to beat 2 opponents while struggling to control the game makes these 3 levels a shit show. I can't stand it when I beat the first opponent and the second opponent comes in and cheap shots me. In the arcade, these parts are tough, but they still seem fair. It really does come down to a test of endurance, but the Super Nintendo version is a test of patience. The computer gets really cheap here too. It's demoralizing. Having to continue over and over just to lose when you're so close to the end is really painful. What's worse is Goro and Shang Tsung are fucking pushovers. I destroyed them on my first try. I was kinda disappointed. Can you have some fucking balance here? And speaking of disappointing, let's take a look at the fatalities. In every version of the game, the only people whose fatalities stay the same are Scorpion, Sonya, and Liu Kang. I never really understood Liu Kang's fatality. He flops all around and uppercuts you. It's awful. Kano's is also kinda the same, but I don't understand what he's ripping out of Liu Kang. I guess it's his sweat gland or something? Sub-Zero loses his famous head rip and instead freezes and shatters you. That makes sense, actually. I think it's a more appropriate fatality for Sub-Zero, but what I don't understand is how do they scream after being frozen and shattered? Raiden's fatality is pretty cool too. He electrocutes you into dust. To be honest, I actually like this over his original fatality. The pit fatality is pretty lame. Without blood, it just looks wrong. When Johnny Cage gets knocked down, he just chills out down there. He looks completely fine, like by some miracle he fell all the way down and missed the spikes. Speaking of Johnny Cage, his fatality is by far the worst in the game, and maybe even the whole series. He kicks you in the chest and his foot disappears while they just flail around. I mean, this right here is the epitome of not even trying. I mean, you couldn't even try to make that happen. His foot disappears before it even touches. What is going on? Well, this gets my award for the shittiest fatality. Alright, well, let's move on to the next one. The Genesis version. Now, let me tell you straight out, this is a deal breaker to me, because 3 buttons? 3 buttons for Mortal Kombat? How does that work? Both high punch and low punch share the A button. A regular tap is a low punch. If you're holding a direction, it turns it to high punch. B and C are both the kick buttons, and start is block. So it can be done, but the thing is, you just gotta get a 6-button controller. If you have the 6-button controller, you're fine. The main advantage this one has over the Super Nintendo is the blood. Yep, it has the blood. After you put in a code, that is. Without the code, you get censored fatalities and no blood. The censored fatalities in this one are actually worse than the Super Nintendo version. Sub-Zero just uppercuts you into the air, Johnny Cage shadow kicks you off the screen, Raiden shoots lightning and you fall, and Kano steals your wallet? He steals your wallet. Yeah, I mean, I guess he takes your wallet and the shock of it kills you. There's absolutely no reason to play this without the code. The pit is actually turned off without the code, so fuck this shit. Put in that blood code. God damn it. Reset and hit ABACABB or ABACAB at the text in the beginning. There's also a second code called the Dullard code. You get this one by hitting down, up, left, A, right, down at the start screen. Get it? It spells Dullard. Besides unlocking blood and the real fatalities, you also get a cheat menu that lets you do some cool stuff. You can make it so the computer always uses a fatality, make Reptile appear before every fight, give yourself infinite continues, and make the head of Fergus McGovern bob around the moon. Fergus McGovern was the founder of Probe Software, and his face pops up as an Easter egg in their Mortal Kombat ports. He shows up in Mortal Kombat 2 as a secret fatality, the Furgality. Yeah, no joke, the Furgality. But anyway, back to the Genesis port. At first glance, it doesn't look as good as the Super Nintendo version. The colors are all muted and everyone has these red pixels around them. But hey, fuck it, there's blood, right? That's all you need. And the controls are actually responsive and don't feel like there's 8 seconds of lag. The music has that signature Genesis feel and actually sounds groovier than the Super Nintendo. I mean, listen to the courtyard music on the Super Nintendo. And compare it to the Genesis. So, overall, it's a decent port with flaws that don't harm the overall experience. Of course, you have to have the 6-button controller, though. Now, let's fuck it all up and play Mortal Kombat on Game Boy. Yeah, can you believe I'm doing this? You want to bring Mortal Kombat with you wherever you go, huh? Well, to that I say don't. Just don't. Wait till you get home, because this is easily the worst version of Mortal Kombat I've played so far. This one was also made by Probe, but they must have rushed through this and spent all their game development talent on the Genesis version. The music is a mess of screeches and farts. It just sounds like ass and a half. The game only has 6 characters instead of 7. You can't fit one more guy? They could do 6, but they just couldn't do 7. Johnny Cage is left out on this one, but I'm pretty sure he's cool with it. Liu Kang has one big tooth. Raiden looks like someone walked in on him in the bathroom. Scorpion and Sub-Zero are barely distinguishable. And Sonya has these dark, soulless eyes. She freaks me the fuck out. The game just gets worse and worse as you play it. If you thought the Super Nintendo was unresponsive, this game changes the entire definition of unresponsive. There's a good second of input lag on all the moves. Lots of the time, you kick through the enemy. How did I not hit them? Am I a ghost and didn't know it? Is that the twist? Trying to pull off a special move is a fucking feat. Sometimes I get them and other times I'll do all the same shit only to get my ass handed to me while I flail around. And don't even think of trying out a fatality. They might as well not even be in the game because I tried and I couldn't even do one of them. And it doesn't help the Game Boy has only 2 buttons. Yeah, if I had a problem with the Genesis having 3, Game Boy only has 2. How do you play Mortal Kombat with 2? And yeah, okay, the Game Boy has limitations. There's certain things they just couldn't help. But you know what? Mortal Kombat 2 on Game Boy was pretty decent. So I think they just fucked up here. Even if I could pull the fatalities off, guess what? They're awful. For example, Kano just kicks you in the air. Yeah, not worth the frustration. It's like right after they made the Genesis version, they said, oh yeah, you gotta make a Game Boy version too. And they were like, oh shit, we only have 7 minutes. And this is what they gave us. After playing through it for almost an hour, I managed to get to Goro, but boy, he fucked my shit up. In the first round, he was super easy, but then he went into like a panic mode and decimated me. I lost all my continues and just couldn't force myself to give a shit. Game over. Boy, Nintendo's really getting the shitty end of the Mortal Kombat port stick. Well, hopefully Sega can salvage it with the Game Gear version and round it out nicely. This one has a blood code, and it's in color! Oh, and unlike the Game Boy, has Johnny Cage. But no Kano. Overall, it's okay, but compared to the Game Boy, it's legendary. I mean, if you're looking for Mortal Kombat on the go, this is the one you want. All the fatalities are here too, just Game Gearified. Sadly, there's no pit fatality, even though the only 2 levels you get are Goro's Lair and the Pit. The game does have some issues. It looks real choppy and slow. The background always jitters when you move, and the game feels like the characters are underwater. And for some reason, Goro is shorter in this version. Looks so weird. Goro's supposed to be the most intimidating boss in the game. He's a huge 4-armed monster man and the prince of the Shokan race. He commands the armies of Outworld, but here he just looks goofy. It's like when they made tiny Goros as pets in the Judge Dredd arcade game. Maybe we'll do that sometime. Well, It's passable, but still kind of shitty, and I can't end on something that's kind of shitty, you know? So instead, let's end on some real ass vomit. Mortal Kombat on Tiger Electronics. 2 of them! 2! Yeah, cause why the fuck not? And would you know, Hasbro is bringing these things back? So the timing's perfect. So the first of the 2 was a standard Tiger Electronic in '93, and the commercial was hilarious. It was a bunch of kids on a playground trying to get rid of the damn game. Even the kids in the commercial didn't want this thing. But then in '94, they made a Tiger Barcodes version, or Barcods. Yeah, let's see what Tiger did to Mortal Kombat. Yeah, look at this. That Tiger fucking mauled it! Unfortunately, my Tiger handheld of Mortal Kombat doesn't work, you know, so I can't play it. All I see is a jumbled mess of a person on the screen, so we could just forget about this one. Except for the fact that they made Tiger handheld emulators! What the fuck? Yeah, Tiger handheld emulators. I'm not even kidding. I think it's safe to say we've officially hit the bottom of the porto potty when it comes to video game emulation. A human being had to actually scan all the artwork in the games and program them to work on a MAME emulator. So what you're seeing here is an emulated version of the Tiger Electronic Mortal Kombat, and now it sucks balls in HD. Surprisingly, the game features all 7 original characters, as well as Goro and Shang Tsung. Wow! The Game Boy and Game Gear version couldn't even get all 7. Well, that's 1 point for Tiger Electronics. Go get 'em, Tiger! But each character is just the same with graphics added. Sonya is the worst of all because she shares the same body as Johnny Cage and Liu Kang. There actually do exist button combinations where you can pull off special moves. This is also how you do the finishing moves, which just knocks them out. It's shitty, but honestly, I think I'd rather play this than the Game Boy version. Moving on, we have the Tiger Barcods version. This one's a bit bigger and actually has real sound instead of just beeps and boops. There's only 4 selectable characters in this one: Liu Kang, Raiden, Sub-Zero, and Scorpion. And Goro's the only boss, no Shang Tsung. The special moves and fatalities are the same as in the other Tiger game, but this time when you pull off a fatality, the opponent turns into a skeleton, which is kinda cool for a Tiger game. I mean, who would have thought? Fatalities in a Tiger game? And one really weird thing about this is that it comes with trading cards. No, not these trading cards. These kind of trading cards, which are the kind that you scan to get all kinds of power-ups and shit. I guess that's kind of cool, but you never know what the cards are going to do. Some cards give your character or the opponent more strength, defense, life, etc. But some cards outright kill you. Why would you want a card that kills you before the fight even starts? What is the point? And it's not like there's any descriptions on these cards that really tell you exactly what they do. It's just a guessing game, so they threw the death ones on here just to be assholes. There's also a card that kills the opponent without even having to fight them. Just scan it and they die. You can actually beat the entire game by just scanning this card. Yeah, so in case you're planning to speed run a Tiger game, you could just scan this 10 times. I don't see the point. Why even turn the damn thing on to begin with? Well, those are all the ports shat out on Mortal Monday, as well as some extra dingleberries. I know I missed some other ports like the Sega CD version, but that one is mostly the same as the Genesis with some enhancements. Also, I mainly wanted to stick to the original console releases. And the Tiger ones needed to be shit on because they exist. Well, to this day, Mortal Kombat is still one of gaming's biggest franchises. After 28 years, it's still going strong. And even though it was inspired by Street Fighter, it set itself apart and inspired all kinds of other fighting games, many of which are clones or rip-offs of Mortal Kombat.
When Pac-Man was released in 1980, that little yellow pie-slice chomper dominated arcades everywhere. Now this game might seem passé by today's standards, but back in 1980, all the best that the video game world had to offer us were games like Breakout, Space Invaders, and Galaxian. So when Pac-Man came along, well, that fun maze-like gameplay revolutionized the industry. And besides that groundbreaking formula of chasing ghosts only when they turn blue, well, this was also the very first video game that brought us an original video game mascot for us to play as. Because prior to Pac-Man, video games allowed you to play as generic cowboys, blocky characters, starships, pong balls, and whatever the hell this is supposed to be. But with Pac-Man, they gave us an actual character to play as. And of course, any game that exploded onto the scene back in those days was eventually approached by Atari so they could port that thing to their VCS. Unfortunately, the limitations of this console at the time wouldn't be able to support a game that looked like this, so they ended up creating a Pac-Man game that looked like, this. Yeah. I know this game is something left to be desired, but let's just give this a chance. I mean, we still get to chase ghosts around the screen and collect those little power pellets. And if we manage to eat those big power pellets, we can then chase after those ghosts. And now, are these ghosts still edible right now? I can't even tell the difference. Well, that pretty much wrinkles my shit. For a game only involving 2 different characters on screen, one of which just happens to glitch out the entire game, is pretty damn bad. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they blink out, or even teleport completely off the screen without warning. What the hell am I playing here? Now, I know a lot of online gamers have ripped this thing more assholes than a public restroom sees daily, but here again is another game where that Phantom Menace effect that I talked about in the last episode comes into play. Because while growing up, I didn't hear one person complain about this game. And sure, it was flawed as shit, but everyone just accepted that this was the inferior version of Pac-Man. If you wanted to play the original, then you had to get your ass to the arcade and play it. And if you wanted that better version of Pac-Man, well, you needed to upgrade to the Atari 5200. Yeah, now that's more like it. Although the aspect ratio is totally off on this game, to the point where I just have this insatiable need to squish this shit back into place. Alright, there we go. Once you do that, well, it turns out to be a pretty decent port. But of course now all the sprites are squished to hell. Ah, well, I guess I can live with that. I mean, this version is pretty faithful, right down to the ghosts being red, pink, green. Green?! What bastion of hell created this demonic asswipe of a game? Let's look at that. Fuck this game. Get this out of my face! Because I'm willing to wait a couple more years until this thing was ported to the NES, despite the whole Tengen battle thing. And once starting this one up, well, we see that this game is just what Dr. Mario ordered. The aspect ratio is perfect, it sounds great, and it looks great as well. The only downside is that some of the reds and blue colors are a bit flat when compared to the original. But this game is so perfect, it's something I'm willing to overlook. Now if we switch gears from Pac-Man to Donkey Kong, well, we see a similar evolution taking place here. Donkey Kong for the arcade is iconic, yes, but Donkey Kong for the Atari 2600, what in the holy mother of fucking Stein is this? No. Ever been to an all-you-can-eat buffet and see someone took a shit in the refried beans? Because this is that game. A bunch of shitty beans. But if we take a look at the Donkey Kong version on the Atari 7800, well, now we're getting ourselves some shit-free refried beans. Because this game looks and feels just like that original. And even though this is a great port, well, things got even better when the NES came along, because Nintendo was finally able to deliver a perfect Donkey Kong video game. The only thing that was missing was that conveyor belt level, which, damn it. Just scratch what I just said. Man, we were so close, too. Now, I love me some Burger Time, but if you're gonna serve me up some Burger Time for the Atari, well, I'm gonna shove that Asperger right back in your face. Now, the original video game was just awesome. Running around making hamburgers, perfect. But when they ported this thing to the Atari, oh, for crying out loud. This eyesore of a game has so much ass coming out of it, this is the first eyesore that becomes an ass-sore. I mean, just look at this garbage. Egg enemies have become stick figures, and how the hell do you mess up the sausage enemies? One of them looks like an actual sausage, where the other one looks like a dick. Get this Asperger off my screen. So by now, you're probably seeing the common theme unfolding where graphics in arcade games were always light years ahead of what could be achieved on home consoles. And as long as the arcades can maintain that technological curve, they're able to thrive. Once home gaming graphics finally caught up to the graphics found in the arcade during the 1990s, well, that's when the arcade scene started to be killed off, because why go to the arcade when you can just play the exact same game at home? Like, take Pac-Mania for instance. Seeing Pac-Man run around in a Legoland level didn't go unnoticed by me as a kid, because I loved both Pac-Man and Lego. So when I saw the NES port of this game finally released at my local video game rental store, I was super excited. But when I finally sat down to play it, damn it all, they turned Pac-Mania into a packed pile of porcupine piss. Because half the game's charm was the awesome graphics, where it was given a cartoony cel-shaded look. And with the NES version, well, they stripped all that away into a downgraded dumpster fire. But if you think that's bad, we'll just check out this shit when we switch gears to another gaming franchise done in by console limitations, Dragon's Lair. Dragon's Lair was the coolest damn game when I saw this in arcades. A game that played like an actual cartoon? Like what? To say this game was revolutionary is an understatement, because I hovered around this damn game for hours until someone finally good at this thing would finally come along and would finally get to those later stages where we can see those levels like with the balls in the corridor. Man, that was freaking awesome. And of course, when I played this game, I sucked at it because it was one of those games where you had to press the right button at the right time or you'll just keep dying over and over again. So, yeah, if I wanted to see this game, I had to wait till somebody awesome at this came along. But oddly enough, some dummy came along and thought they could actually port this game that looked like an actual cartoon to the NES and do it justice. And as a dumb kid, well, I bought into this thing, hook, line, and sinker. Because if you look at the NES cover, well, it has all that iconic cartoony imagery. So I thought, hey, this has to be the same game, right? Well, this 8-bit bent boner bastard of a game not only looked terrible, but they also replicated the exact gameplay of needing to hit the right button at the right time bullshit. Shit! Damn it! Now come on! This is only the first part of level 1! I can't imagine what the hell the last level is like, because that hitting the right button at the right time mechanic just doesn't work for this game. Now you could say, oh, Irate Gamer, this could have worked if it was a side-scrolling adventure game. Well, no it wouldn't, because, well, they did that with the SNES version. I mean, even though the graphics are upgraded, well, this turns out to be another bumblefuck of a game that I just want to chuck into the nearest wood chipper. They put so many stupid obstacles in this game to avoid that it becomes a literal countdown to see how fast you can die. Which isn't that long, apparently. And even if you graduate to the Sega CD version, you might think, hey, the original arcade game was on a Laserdisc, this could work. Well, slow down there, Chief. Because yes, we do finally get a small taste of what Dragon's Lair could be like in the comfort of your own home, but again, we have those damn graphical limitations. The compression method used on this video is absolutely horrid. I think I get better print quality on my dot matrix printer from the 1990s. Oh, and the controls suck too. I just can't win. And of course, we had to wait 20 years until this thing was ported onto the PlayStation to get the exact arcade feel that we were looking for. Boy, talk about a long 20 years. Now, thankfully, not all the games that were ported onto the NES suffered from those hardware limitations. But instead, the biggest drawback of the first batch of arcade games ported to the Nintendo was that they gave us such faithful recreations of these games, they only gave us 3 lives to complete the game and no continues. These morons all overlooked the simple fact that you couldn't just dump a quarter into the console whenever the game was over. What the hell's up with that? No continues, no bonus lives, nothing. Just pack your shit and go home. Talk about killing off any replayability these games had. Especially with that unholy mother of fuck game called Ghosts and Goblins. 35 years later and this game still sends me over the edge. And this game is so hard, I dare anyone to even get off that first level. And of course after dying, the stupid game mocks you with that stage startup screen, showing you all those later levels that you'll never even get to see.
Over 40 years later, an Irate Gamer still can't beat me! Oh, you asshole! Oh, and I have to give up smoking.
I mean, what the hell is the point of creating an entire game if no one can even reach the second level? Well, thankfully this 3 lives and no continues nonsense ended up getting resolved when the next batch of video games were released for the console, like Ikari Warriors and Contra. Because it was these games that started embedding secret codes into them that helped gamers play even further than you ever could otherwise. Oh, thank God for that. And speaking of Contra, well, back in the day, I had no idea this was based off an arcade game. But yep, it was. And even though the arcade version was vastly superior in the graphics department, well, somehow, the NES version turned out to be a much better game. Huh? How the hell did that happen? Well, you'd think it'd be the other way around, but nope, it didn't. And it was because Konami went the extra mile by making the levels longer, easier, and even adding in extra ones to the game by really ramping up the playability and having that home video game player in mind. So what we ended up with was a pretty awesome Contra game. And whatever they did seemed to work because this trend also continued into other video games like Paperboy. The original arcade game had some of the best graphics around at the time, and they were far superior to the NES version. And of course, when they ported this to the NES, they reworked this to the point where Paperboy is actually the superior game. Because when we look at the arcade game, well, the pace of this one is super fast, causing the player to crash almost as soon as you started the game. Damn it! As for the NES version, well, they slowed things down a bit, so you can at least get through the paper route for the day. And the same thing happened with Spy Hunter. The arcade game had superior graphics, but man, was it a fast-paced game. With the NES version, well, they slowed things down a bit again, and the levels were extended to offer up a lot of replayability. But if you want the best example of an NES game outshining the arcade game, well, it has to be Punch-Out! Now, I spent half my childhood playing this damn game because, well, it was so well made. But when I saw the game Punch-Out in the arcade, well, I kept having to do a double take because I wasn't even sure if this was the same game or not. I mean, this one was a complete departure from the NES version. It clearly had the same name, some of the same fighters like Glass Joe, but the playable character of Mac was this weird wireframe dude, the camera angle was off, and you had all these unrecognizable new fighters that you had to fight through. So even though there was an arcade version, well, I wanted no part of it. Just give me the NES version, and I'll be a happy camper. But of course, for every good game that outshone the original, well, we had about 1,000 others that stunk like a leaky asshole. Now let's take the video game Bad Dudes for instance. This was an arcade game I just loved. I used to love playing this rare 2-player arcade game with my cousin at the local pizzeria we had. And it was really hard to find 2-player games back then, so when I found this game, it was just awesome. So when I went to the local video game rental store and saw they ported this game to the NES, I was super excited. We got this game home, popped it in. Yes! Same level, same fighters, and a 2-player game mode that allowed you to play 1 player at a time. Oh, what the fuck? Why did they go and change the best feature of this game? You couldn't figure out a way to give us both players playing at the same time? Just lazy. Well, at least it wasn't as bad as the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom port. My god, this game was an absolute basket of assholes. Little did I realize that this too was originally an arcade game, which really wasn't all that bad. But here again, we find the company taking a mediocre game and trying to stitch more game elements into it. They have no sense even being in this game in the first place to give us one piece of shit port full of something that has 40 fucking levels in? Like, really? Do we really need that many goddamn levels? Temple of Doom? You're a temple of ass! Now thankfully, when we start getting up into the era where Mortal Kombat was released, we find the consoles at the time, well, ported this game pretty darn well. And when it came to the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis ports, they could replicate the game about 95% of the way there. Well, both versions delivered a pretty close game. The only thing really off was the graphics were downgraded slightly, and they gave us a different aspect ratio. And even if we look at the Sega CD version, which was probably the most faithful version out there at the time, well, even they had to scale the graphics back a bit to bring this classic to the console. But of course, this game was so close to the original, it's kind of pointless to even rant about it. So in the end, as you can see, we got some great ports and, well, not so great ports. And every one of those games ended up shaping or scarring my childhood.